an issue that was a talking point during the run-up to the Lok Sabha elections, but will caste census be a reality? The Tamil Nadu Assembly today passed a resolution demanding a national caste census. The resolution was moved by the state's Chief Minister M.K. Stalin and came after the Patali Makkal Kanchi, an NDA ally, demanding a 10.5% quota for the one-year castes within the 20% quota for OBCs in the state. While Tamil Nadu has passed that resolution, the larger question is really whether there will ever be a consensus on caste census which has different realities in different states. Even within the INDIA alliance or even the Congress, for instance, there are sharply differing points of view. And even after several years of conducting a socio-economic survey, for instance, states like Karnataka haven't released that data for fear of upsetting the status quo and a political backlash. So is the demand for a caste census just pure political talk with no reality inside? Joining us this evening, senior journalist Smita Gupta, political analyst Manisha Priyam, and Professor Chandan Gowda. Smita, my first question to you. One has often heard political demands for a caste census that's been made, but it seems like something of a distant reality, given that it could be treacherous politically to upset the status quo for several political forces.
You're right, Veeraraghav. It would be treacherous for many political parties. But the fact is that I think what has really changed is that the Congress party, which is today, which has been the largest opposition party and now has increased its numbers, greatly, is in favor of a caste census. Earlier, the only parties that used to push for a caste census were the so-called Mandal parties, and of course the parties in the southern half of the country. But now with the Congress also joining this, I think the pressure will be that much greater. The ruling party, the BJP at the center, has consistently been opposed to a caste census because it feels that the OBCs that it managed to get on board over the last decade, especially in the northern half of the country, that the kind of equations it has built will be upset and it will have to rework it. Because clearly, of course, we can see, take the example of Bihar, which has released this data and which has announced that 63% of the people there are OBCs. And of course, the numbers of different OBC communities have also changed. So, while the reason for having a caste census is, of course, a noble one that suggests that if you have a proper caste census, then you can target, whatever goods the state, allocates for people can be targeted in a better way, in a fairer way. But I think getting to that last point will be very difficult.
In a more statistically backed way, in terms of demands for internal reservation within quota within quota can be dealt with on the basis of data if there was a caste census. But Chandan Gowda, even for states like Karnataka, which have conducted socio-economic survey, it's become very difficult to release that data because it could upset the status quo. For a party like the DMK, which has Tamil Nadu being the only state with 69% reservation as well, it is an issue to upset the status quo of the internal allocations between the OBC or the MBC castes in that state, which is why it's been put on the center rather than the state itself taking up a socio-economic survey. Is that the reality?
There are two quick responses. See, if the caste census report in Karnataka hasn't been made public yet, and I think there were some doubts about the methodology used and the soundness of it, and it is the backward class commission chair who has to defend what he has done, and that is yet to be seen. So there are and so I wouldn't simply say here are dominant castes opposing it because their interests will be hurt. We don't know the contents of the census yet. The other thing, Veera, collecting caste census data is hugely time-consuming. It costs money, and it's effort. If you think about it, the 10-year census that is done, that is the best equipped to do it, because it's just a question of adding another column to an existing information sheet and you gather the data you need, and you can correlate that with all the other essential data points: education, class, gender, region, all these indices by which you judge whether a community is advanced or backward, quote unquote. So the Tamil Nadu's demand that it be done by the center should not be seen as only, oh, it's something that they would themselves like not to do, but shifting it to somebody else. I don't think that's the rationale. It's really in everyone's interest to do it along with the regular census, which anyway is going to be done sometime soon, I hope. But
Right.
Veera, in addition to be able to decide internal reservation better, there's also the other real serious question of removing certain communities from the backward caste list and adding a few deserving ones into it. And all of that can happen only when you have recent data. Because if we keep going back to the 1931 data, we can't decide on any of these things.
Right. As you're making that point, Manisha Priyam, you have observed several states, including Bihar, where the socio-economic survey or the caste data were released. From the verdict of 2024, do you believe that it gives greater push for caste census nationally or having that kind of a data, or is it still just political saber rattling?
No, I think in the state of Bihar, having the caste census had a lot of ring on the ground. And I was amazed to see as to how much of local discussions was centered around the fact that a caste census has indeed happened. And many people would tell me, you wait and see, the results that will come out will surprise all of you. So in a sense, there was one definite positive, and which was that we were simply extrapolating 1931 data, and there was some relief in large parts of the population. And you remember also that in Bihar, we have a much larger rural population. So, and residing in rural areas is a disadvantage in its own way. So there was some relief that at least we are being counted in. There might be a few things that may happen in the future. And that had a ring and resonance on the ground to the extent that in the run-up to the elections, I saw OBC caste, even MLAs of the BJP, equivalent to what's called the Vaniyar caste, the Vaniyars on this side, they had gathered in a meeting and they said, look, we want to follow the trail of the caste census. Many of the groups, Bihar has a very low population of scheduled tribes, but there are groups now that live on the Bihar-Nepal border, and I could see their aspirations rising and saying that we now want to be listed as a scheduled tribe. So what I could see was a classic M.N. Srinivas type of sociological churning, where people were looking at the counting process itself as being some way of according them a place in the hierarchy,
Right.
or a possible place in the future public policy. Having said that, I do agree with Chandan that
Right.
having specific caste census does not help with anything. It's the normal census that should be held soon, and this data should be collected along with the normal census data. The second and more tricky point is, how do you determine social and economic backwardness? You need to pull out some groups. Those questions remain important still.
There are very technical questions, as you point out. Remember, often the caste census or caste issue is picked up for political reasons as well in terms of the power struggle. Stay with us, Smita Gupta, Manisha Priyam and Chandan Gowda.